Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. And as we delve into this week's topic, a reminder that some of the content may be of a sensitive nature. Now, here's your host, Des Kennedy.
Hi, this is Des from Momentum. This week on the show, we're doing something a little bit different. I'm actually being interviewed by a guy called Simon Groeschl, who runs a podcast called Restoring Authentic Men, and he's based in Geelong in Victoria. And so on with the show.
And welcome once again to our RAM podcast. Yes, it is Simon with you once again. Thank you for joining me. Today I have a very special guest. Yes, he's Irish. We're not going to do any Irish jokes at all. But more importantly...
I understand them anyway.
Oh, there you go. More importantly, he runs a men's ministry called Momentum. Welcome, Des Kennedy.
It's great to be with you. Really, really cool, Simon. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your listeners and wherever they may be around the world. It's really cool to be able to talk into the lives of men.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. And I've heard about your ministry for many years, and I thought, well, you're probably the perfect person who resonates with guys in general. And this is what I'm loving, this conversation we're about to have. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, Des, of people who don't know you, a little bit about your background. Clearly, you're Irish. You're from Belfast, I believe. That I've given that away. Have I already?
Oh, no, that's okay. I grew up in Belfast, right in the centre of Belfast. In those days, Belfast was a war zone. And I'd been shot at, I've been blown up, I've been attacked, and for part of that time, actually, towards the end of my time in Ireland, I was actually in the reserve police force in Belfast. And so that was an interesting experience, because I used to go to bed with my pistol underneath my pillow.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. And the house next door to me in Belfast, actually, the guy who lived in it was taken into custody by the police because he had ammunition and explosive material in his basement. So it was a crazy life in Belfast. But, I had a great childhood. I had a great mum and dad, great siblings. They were Christian. And interesting enough, all the rest of my siblings all came to faith, and I was the opposite. I was truly the prodigal son. And so me leaving Ireland with a wife and two kids into Sydney was all about me getting away to a different land.
Okay.
Away from influences that I didn't particularly enjoy.
My goodness. That's like you were saying, obviously you living in Ireland, being born there, was it the norm to always live on the edge in one sense, or that was just a normal part of your life?
Well, it's interesting a bit about a war zone, because in a war zone, you accept the norm that it is. Now, obviously in Ireland, it was Catholic Protestant, as opposed to maybe Christian versus Muslim. But I mean, the same principles apply in any of those things. And so, all sorts of, stupid and wrong connotations and phrases you used whenever you were talking about the Catholics versus the Protestants and so forth. And I grew up in a Christian Protestant home. Interesting enough, on one side of me living in Belfast, we had a Jewish family, and on the other side, we had a Catholic family.
Wow.
It was really quite interesting, because we got on really well with the Jewish people, and they actually used to send us Christmas cards, believe it or not. Jewish people, their name was Abraham.
Wow.
And they went back to Israel. And then on the other side with these Catholic families who didn't really talk to very much at all.
Just the whole idea of that segregation just because you are Jewish or Catholic, and clearly for you, this wasn't an issue at all.
No, it was part of life. Yeah. And, so life went on, and you just did what you did. And as I grew up in this Christian family, went to church, and I guess in those days, I saw a lot of things, and maybe it was related to what they call the Troubles in Ireland. Yeah. I really disliked the Christian worldview in some ways.
Sure.
And I rejected that. I always believed, basically, that there was a God. I find it much more logical to assume, purely practically, that there was some creator of the universe. What I couldn't rationalize was that creator and the Christian God. They didn't equate to me for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, so for you, just reflecting back with you, for you, God wasn't a person you could have a relationship with. It was more just an entity up there that's ruling everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And there was a lot of, as with any Christian group, like, and we're all sinful, and we're all doing things wrong. So, even in the church, people expect to go to church and see a perfect congregation. It's not true. It's full of people who sin every day.
Yeah.
And so, we're all on a journey, and
absolutely. Yeah. Now, Des, your heart. Now, I know your heart and passion. I'm presuming so. Correct me if I'm wrong. You do have a real passion for men, and this has been going on for decades, really, in your life. Tell us a little bit about that. I guess we'll dive in a couple of minutes about it, but I'm interested to know what the core issues you've found over the many years working with guys. Maybe go a step back. Maybe tell us about how men's ministry developed for you and how you found that passion for men.
Yeah, and it's funny, I have been involved in like pastoring people and caring for people, not in a Christian sense, but in a general sense.
Yeah.
I've always had to care for people. And when I became a Christian in 2011, after a while, I ended up at Hillsong Church in Brisbane, and I served in that church, and they had men's events. And the men's events was the start of really me being interested in men's ministry, because Hillsong, even though it's an amazing church, it had no men's ministry, nothing that men could grasp hold of. And so I was at a conference we had a conference for men in Brisbane, and I was part of the welcoming team, and all these guys walked in, hundreds of them, like maybe 1,500 men.
Wow.
All walked in. A lot of them were on their phone, and they weren't talking to anybody, didn't engage with anybody, they didn't know anybody. And then the event went on, and eventually they all walked out, and they were still on their phone and not talking to anybody, not engaging with anybody. And it broke my heart. I said, how on earth can people do that? How can they not get connected? And then a few days later, I was at a coffee shop on Logan Road in Brisbane, and I was standing outside, just looking at the traffic, basically, and I felt God say to me, who's going to reach that guy? That bus driver, who's going to reach him? That guy, who's going to reach him? And I said, I've got no skills to do this. I don't know what to do. And so that was the start of me being concerned about men, because men invariably do life on their own. They may be married, they may have kids, but they can still be the loneliest people on the earth.
They're an island, aren't they, Des? They can be an island.
Absolutely right. And so we started off, I spent some time talking to the leadership at Hillsong and said, hey, we need to do something for men. And after a little while, we started doing breakfast, and we ended up having 63 men's groups in Southeast Queensland.
Wow.
And they were fishing groups, they were steak nights, they were breakfasts, they were basketball teams, they were anything that would help men just get together with other men, do life, and talk openly about what's happening in their world. Because, if they go to like a family connect group, for example, in their church, and they're struggling with pornography, they're not going to open up about that in front of their wives and other couples or whatever, or children or whatever.
That's right.
So where do they go to? The pastor probably doesn't even know how to deal with the issues.
Yeah.
And so that was how I got involved with, doing men's groups. The momentum thing came along a bit longer, because through life circumstances, I ended up out of Brisbane and down at Port Macquarie. And so when I went, a guy I knew really well in Port Macquarie, he said, look, why don't you come to this men's group? And at that men's group was a guy who was the general manager of the local Christian radio station, Rema station, and a lovely guy called Werner. And Werner, we had a coffee one day, and he said, look, what's your passion? What do you want to do? I said, no idea. He said, well, what are you passionate about? I said, I love serving men, helping men. He said, well, why don't you do a radio show for men in Port Macquarie? And so my co-host up until the beginning of this year was Tim Charles.
Yeah. And
I phoned Tim, who was on 96.5 in Brisbane. And I said, hey, I've got this opportunity to do this radio show for men in Port Macquarie. Can you give me some advice? And he said, no.
Well, that's helpful.
So we mean no. He said, I don't want to give you advice. He said, I want to do it with you. And so for the past 4 years, he and I have co-hosted Momentum. Now, Tim has since being this year moved on.
Sure, yeah.
So we continue to do Momentum. But now we are on 45 stations across Australia. We're on Vision Radio. We're our podcasts are listened to 62 countries around the world. In fact, last weekend, I got an email from a guy in Zambia.
Wow.
In Zambia, asking about setting up a local church.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hi, we're going to take a short break, and while we're having a break, why don't you have a look around our website, momentumaustralia.org, and guys, don't forget our care line, 1-800-000-MEN. If you need a safe and confidential conversation, that's the place to go. We'll be back shortly.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org. Now, here's your host, Des Kennedy.
I mean, our podcasts are listened to in Iraq, in Syria, all sorts of places where you wouldn't expect a Christian men's ministry to be heard. But, men are hungry for help, for advice, for someone who will understand what's happening.
Can I just rudely interrupt for a minute? It's clearly to me, and I've found this as well working with men and through our podcast as well, that when men do open up, it's just incredible how the release of unburdening their burdens to another guy, what it does for them. And they won't admit that, of course, but, has that been your experience in general?
100%. As I said before, men can be in a room full of people and be the loneliest people around, and and men carry so much. It could be issues from their parents, parental wounding that they haven't recovered from. It could be addictions. It could be depression, suicide. Huge issue for men. A sense of identity. I'll never give you an example of that. In my life, I was blessed to be head of technology at Qantas, for example, and head of technology at NRMA, and major corporations. But my whole identity, my whole self-esteem was built around the job that I had, my career.
Yeah, very familiar.
It was, and so whenever I stepped down from Qantas, for example, the phone calls stopped. Nobody wanted to invite me to lunch. Nobody wanted to invite me to dinner, because they wanted the person who was in that role. And so, it took me a long time to recover from that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a boat in Pittwater in Sydney. And I remember sitting in the back, this again before I became a Christian. I sat in the back of that cruiser and I had a Cuban cigar. I had a beautiful glass of red wine and I had lovely music playing. And I sat there in the back of my boat and I said, is that all there is?
Yeah.
I have everything I want, but I've got nothing.
Yeah.
And now I've got nothing, but I've got everything because of my faith and because the joy that God brings into my life is just fantastic.
And can we take a step back, Des, for those people, for those guys in particular, because this is who we're talking to, obviously, those guys who aren't Christians, there is, and what you're saying is there will always be a void in their lives, no matter which guy we're talking about. Like you were saying, you had the success, you had the Cuban cigar, you were financially doing pretty good, and there was a void. Talk to those guys who aren't Christians and why that void is still there in their life.
Look, it stems down to your identity. What is your identity based on? My identity now is based on a relationship with Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ never changes. He's rock solid, and so my identity is rock solid for that reason. Whereas if you have an identity in a job, the job can disappear. You could have a big house, but you want a bigger house. You've got a lovely car, you want a bigger car. You don't have a boat, you want a boat. Whatever that looks like in your world, and it could be anything, right?
Well, it could be. It could be. It could be the addictive side as well. You lean on something else to fill the void.
Yeah, and I talk to guys who are struggling with their identity in terms of LGBTQ, for example. Men who certainly into pornography. Men who are reaching out for something in their world that they think will give them a level of contentment that which it was void in my world. I had to keep doing stuff to get content.
The doer. Yes, I've heard this many. Yeah. Mm.
People used to say, if you want to get a job done, give it the days to do. But no, there'll be broken glass along the way.
Yes. And I think the idea of, we've spoken this on our podcast many times, the idea of being busy, just to be busy for the sake of being busy, that forms your identity as a guy. It's such a myth.
Yeah, and then at one stage, you take a stroke or you get ill. Not even seriously ill, but something that takes you away from, what your identity is, and you fall apart. Your wife probably doesn't even know who you are when you're in that space.
Yeah, and as we've said quite a few times in our podcast as well, it's this whole idea of, we never shove Christianity down a guy's throat ever. That's not our intention. I'm sure that's not your intention either, but with your ministry momentum, but it comes back always to that core of there's something that's more satisfying than what you're trying to strive for.
Yeah, there's no satisfaction. Ask Elon Musk; he'll tell you there's no satisfaction in having all the money in the world.
Yeah,
it's just a thing, right?
Yeah,
and we're built for relationship, and we're built for a relationship with God. And He has created us to have a relationship with Him. And so if we're neglecting that side of our life, we're missing out on so many things in today's society, but also in our future world.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's the core issues for men that you obviously, and I've looked at your website, there's a plethora of obviously resource and information, but I guess my question is, and it may be a tricky one, maybe think about it or say I'm not sure, the core issues you've found in your ministry for guys, what are those core issues that make guys still very stuck in their life and they can't rebound off that?
Sure, there's probably maybe 4 or 5 of those. I mean, certainly one we just talked about, a man's identity. Who are you in your core? What do you identify yourself as? Are you just a working bloke, or what is your identity? What makes you you? And certainly from a Christian point of view, obviously our relationship with Jesus is most important.
Yep.
So that's one. The second one is our place in society. Men are struggling with understanding their role in not only the workplace, but also at home. As a dad, as a husband, as a head of the house, whatever that means. Couples separate, and all of a sudden they don't see their kids. They don't, have a relationship with their kids. They're estranged. They're lonely. So, things like that are a struggle. But also sitting alongside that is an issue of men trying to be real men, right? Being gentlemen, opening a door for a lady, walking on the outside of the street as a gentleman. Young men today have no idea about those sort of things. And so that whole area of their place in society is a huge issue for men.
Yeah.
The third one clearly is pornography.
Massive.
It's a massive issue. Like, some of the statistics are amazing. Kids as young as 7 and 8, boys, are going onto their dad's phone. Their dad's been watching pornography. They know how to unlock the phone, and they're getting these images in their mind at 6 and 7, and certainly by 13, they are addicted. And they're having these images in their mind, which totally destroys their future in the sense of their view of their mother, their sister, their cousins, their friends, that play with in the street. All those things are distorted by the age of 13. And so it's a huge issue. And I interviewed a guy yesterday, and we were talking about pornography. I'll go to air in a few weeks. And, he just was went to visit his cousin in, I forget where it was, probably Sydney or somewhere. Anyway, he went to visit his cousin every month with his family, and he stayed in his uncle's bedroom. And his uncle had all sorts of magazines, but in the magazines, he found pornographic material, and he got addicted to it. And it has impacted his whole life to the point where his marriage has failed. And, while he's now, recovering from that, it has been a huge issue in his life. Because what pornography does, because it's attractive, men are physically, very, what's the term?
Very visual.
Very visual. That's exactly the right word. And so the brain reprograms itself and the neural pathways in the brain to look for that stimuli all the time. So they're maybe walking down the street, they're in a supermarket, and they're looking at females differently than they should be looking at females. And if they're married, even more so the case. Yeah. And so, that's a huge, huge issue that is, so pornography is not free. Even though you give access for free, the impact of pornography in a family and a man and his kids and so forth is horrendous.
Can I go just a little bit deeper on the other side of the coin as well? The other side of the coin is that people are actually doing the pornography. I would say, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, 99% of the time they're doing it for an income. They've either been forced into it, into slavery, obviously going down that avenue, horrendous things. It's not a thing they enjoy. And I think that's the message I think most guys need to hear. It's not something in general the women enjoy doing.
Like for example, there's an organization called Every Daughter Matters. And Every Daughter Matters is a Christian organization that helps in Nepal young girls being abducted and taken into India and then traded. And majority of them get into the sex trade, not, as you rightly said, not because they want to, but because it's the only way of providing an income for their family, if they can even do that. Yeah. And so, all around the world, America is huge in abduction of young girls. And the whole thing about Epstein, for example, right now, is all about child exploitation and child exploitation for pornography. And, guys are... leaders of the world are going there and participating in that. It's absolutely outrageous. But you're right. It's not a good world. And there's people making billions and billions of dollars from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for myself as a father, I've got two boys. One's almost 12 years old. So he's really in the adolescence area, reminding also our boys and, obviously in other guys' case, if they do have kids, reminding them that women are beautiful and what they're seeing via video pornography is a total distortion. And I think obviously as Christians, we need to home into that more. But in general, it's this idea of God created a woman who's meant to be beautiful, meant to be looked at in a pure way, but that has got completely distorted because, it's a terrible thing that's just happened.
Because men are looking at just the physical body of the lady rather than the whole person for a start.
Yeah.
So join us in a couple of weeks for part 2 of this interview.
You've been listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. For more information or to hear this week's show again, go to momentumaustralia.org. You can also access a whole range of resources to help you on your journey and to get in touch with the team at momentumaustralia.org.